Upon returning from a trip, a father finds the employee sleeping in bed with his children and fires her without listening. Only later does he realize that she was the only presence the boys had since their mother's death. Overcome with guilt, he begins a journey of reconnection that forever transforms the home. Before we begin, become part of our family here on the channel. Subscribe now, leave a like, it helps our work so much, and write in the comments which city you're watching from. I love to know how far our stories travel. The light October rain beat against the windows of the apartment in Greenwich Village when Edward Miller set his suitcase down in the entryway. 3 days in Washington, D.C. for that endless negotiation that had consumed his last few weeks. The silence of the house surprised him. Normally, even at 10 at night, there was some noise from the boys, some light on, some sign of life pulsing through the hallways. Edward was 42 years old and carried the weight of a premature widowhood like a stone in his chest. 8 months ago, Anne-Claire had departed so suddenly that he still woke up some mornings expecting to find her in the kitchen, making coffee and packing the children's lunchboxes. The leukemia had been cruel and swift. In 6 months, it had taken away not only his wife, but also the joy that used to echo through the walls of that home. He climbed the stairs with careful steps, trying not to wake Lucas, Peter, and Gabriel. The eldest, Lucas, was 10, and since his mother's death carried a seriousness that didn't fit his small body. Peter, 8, had become an introspective child who constantly drew dark figures in his notebooks. And Gabriel, the youngest at just 5, still asked when Mommy would be back from her trip. Edward stopped in front of his own bedroom door. A soft light seeped from underneath it. He found it strange. He always left everything off when he traveled. Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper, who had worked with the family for over 15 years, knew this. He turned the knob slowly and pushed the door open. What he saw left him completely paralyzed. Lucy Sanders, the 40-year-old woman who had been working as a cleaner in the house for only 2 months, was lying in his bed. Not alone. Beside her, snuggled like puppies seeking warmth, were his 3 sons. Lucas had his arm thrown over her chest. Peter was curled up, leaning against her shoulder. Gabriel slept, clutching her hand, as if it were his lifeline. The scene should have been touching. A dark-skinned black woman, her curly hair tied in a low bun, wearing her simple work blouse, comforting 3 orphaned children in a moment of desperation. But Edward didn't see that. Not in that first moment. What he saw was an employee in his bed, with his children, without his permission, violating every boundary he believed existed between an employer and an employee. The blood rushed to his cheeks. A visceral anger, fueled by prejudices he didn't even know he carried, took over his chest. How dare she? Who had given her permission to enter his room, lie in his bed, touch his children like that? In a fraction of a second, his mind was flooded with thoughts he would never admit to having. A poor black woman in bed with his children. What kind of situation was this? He clapped his hands hard, a sharp sound that cut through the silence like a blade. Lucy woke with a start. Her eyes, still cloudy with sleep, met his, which were filled with fury. She understood immediately what was happening. It wasn't the first time she had experienced this. She knew that look, that expression of moral outrage that mixed suspicion and revulsion. She got up slowly without making a sound, trying not to wake the children. The boys stirred. Lucas opened his eyes and smiled when he saw his father. "Daddy, you're back," he whispered, with a genuine joy Edward hadn't seen in months. "Go to your rooms. Now." Edward's voice came out harsher than he intended. "But Dad," Peter began, rubbing his eyes. "Now, Peter. You too, Lucas and Gabriel. To your rooms." Lucy helped Gabriel get up, running a hand through his hair, with a gentleness that contrasted with the tension in the room. "Easy now, sweetie. Go on to your room," she said, her soft voice calming the children. Edward waited for them to leave the room before he exploded. "What is this, Lucy? What were you doing in my bed with my children?" She faced him with dignity. There was no defiance in her gaze, but there was no submission either. "Mr. Miller, they were scared. Ever since you left. I don't want explanations. I don't want excuses. I want you to get your things and leave. Now." The words shot out of his mouth like bullets. Lucy took a step back, as if she'd been punched in the stomach. For a moment her eyes shone with a deep pain, but she quickly recomposed her expression. "All right, Mr. Miller." She left the room in silence. Edward followed her, watching as she collected her purse and the few belongings she kept in the laundry room closet. Mrs. Davis appeared in the kitchen, awakened by the noise, and watched the scene with an expression of disbelief. "Lucy, what's happening?" the housekeeper asked. "I'm leaving, Mrs. Davis. Take good care of the boys." She headed towards the children's rooms. Edward followed her, suspicious, as if she were capable of something terrible. But what he saw in the next few minutes confused him. Lucy entered Gabriel's room first. The boy was sitting on the bed, tears in his eyes. "Aunt Lucy, are you leaving?" She knelt to his level and held his small hands. "I am, sweetie. But you're a very brave boy, remember, and you'll keep on being brave. I don't want you to go." "I know, sweetie. But sometimes people have to leave, even when we don't want them to. That doesn't mean they don't love us, okay?" She kissed his forehead and left quickly, before he could protest. In Peter's room, the goodbye was just as painful. The Rehoboam boy, always quiet, just hugged her tightly and murmured a thank you that almost broke Lucy's heart. In Lucas's room, the eldest was waiting for her, standing with his arms crossed. "Why do you have to leave? Was it because of last night?" "It wasn't your fault, Lucas. It was never your fault." She hugged him too, and Edward realized there was an intimacy there that he didn't understand, a connection that had formed in his absence, one he knew nothing about. Lucy went down the stairs, passed through the living room where Anne-Claire used to read her magazines, passed through the kitchen where she made coffee every morning, and reached the front door. Before leaving, she turned to Edward one last time. "Mr. Miller, I know you don't want to hear this, but they are very special children. They need affection. They need to feel that someone cares about them." He didn't answer. He just watched as she opened the door and disappeared into the New York night. As soon as she was gone, Mrs. Davis approached him, her expression a mix of disappointment and incredulity. "Edward, what have you done? What have I done? What was she doing in my bed with my children? Don't you find that strange, Mrs. Davis?" The housekeeper shook her head, as if talking to a stubborn child. "Edward, that woman has cared for your children like no one has since Anne-Claire died. Didn't you see? Didn't you notice?" Edward felt a pang of irritation. Mrs. Davis sometimes forgot her place in that house. "I can take care of my own children, Mrs. Davis." "Can you, really? When was the last time you sat down to have dinner with them? When was the last time you asked how their day at school was? When was the last time you saw them truly smile?" The housekeeper's words hurt because they carried truth. Since Anne-Claire's death, Edward had taken refuge in his work. It was easier to deal with contracts and meetings than with the pain in his children's eyes. It was simpler to pretend everything was fine than to admit he didn't know how to be a father without Anne-Claire by his side. He went back up to his room. It was then that he noticed on the nightstand a folded piece of paper. He opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was simple but neat. "Mr. Miller, they asked not to be left alone in the dark. They said that when you're not here, they have nightmares about their mommy. Yesterday, Gabriel had a panic attack and only calmed down when I promised to stay with them. I didn't sleep in the bed, I just sat beside it until they fell asleep. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, they were clinging to me as if I were the only thing keeping them safe. I didn't have the heart to leave. I apologize if this seemed inappropriate. I just wanted them to know they aren't alone. Lucy." Edward read the note 3 times. With each reading, he felt his chest tighten. He sat on the edge of the bed where, hours before, his children had slept peacefully for the first time in months, for the first time since Anne-Claire's death. What had he done? He slept poorly for the rest of the night, haunted by contradictory thoughts. A part of him still felt angry about the invasion of privacy. Another part, growing larger, was beginning to understand the gravity of what had happened. When the sun rose over New York City, Edward went down to the kitchen expecting to find the usual morning buzz. Mrs. Davis making coffee, the boys running around, Gabriel looking for his favorite toys, Peter organizing his school backpack, Lucas trying to convince someone he didn't need to eat breakfast. But that's not what he found. Gabriel was sitting on the living room floor, still in his pajamas, crying desperately. Not a tantrum cry, but a deep, despairing sob. Peter was curled up on the sofa, hugging a cushion with a vacant look that frightened Edward. Lucas was in the kitchen trying to make a smoothie for his younger brother, but his hands were shaking. "Dad, where's Aunt Lucy?" Gabriel asked between sobs. She had to leave." "But why? Why does everyone leave?" the boy screamed, with a fury Edward had never seen in him. "Gabriel, you need to calm down. Let's have breakfast and—" "I don't want breakfast. I want Aunt Lucy. She promised she wouldn't leave." Peter got up from the sofa and faced his father with an expression of disappointment that cut Edward's heart. "You sent her away, didn't you, just like you did with Aunt Carla, and with Mrs. Francis, and with the nanny Mom hired?" Edward didn't know what to say. He hadn't realized his children were aware of his pattern of behavior. Lucas approached slowly. He was the oldest, but still a child, and Edward saw in his eyes a forced maturity that shouldn't be there. "Dad, Aunt Lucy wasn't like the others. She really cared about us." "What do you mean?" Lucas exchanged glances with Peter, as if they were deciding what to tell and what to hide. "Last week, when Gabriel choked on that piece of candy, she was the one who saved him. Mrs. Davis was at the store and you were in D.C. Gabriel turned purple, Dad. She did that thing where you push on his stomach and got the candy out of his throat." Edward felt the world spin. Gabriel had choked. How did he not know about this? And when Peter fell off his bike and cut his knee, she took care of the wound. She washed it with hydrogen peroxide, put a Band-Aid on it, and talked to him until the pain went away. "And she knew really good stories," added Gabriel, still sobbing. "She told stories about brave princesses and knights who didn't have to fight. They just had to be kind." "Every night?" Edward asked. Peter nodded. "Every night you weren't here. She stayed with us until we fell asleep. She said kids shouldn't be afraid of the dark." Edward sat down heavily in a kitchen chair. He was beginning to understand the extent of his ignorance. While he buried himself in work to escape the pain, a stranger had taken on the role that should have been his, and he had sent her away in the worst possible way. Mrs. Davis appeared in the kitchen carrying grocery bags. "Did you talk to her?" Edward asked. "I did, I tried, but she said she doesn't want any more trouble, that she's been through this before." "What do you mean, been through this before?" Mrs. Davis sighed deeply. "Edward, Lucy isn't just a woman who cleans houses. She's a nurse. She was a nurse. She lost her license after she lost her daughter." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "She had a daughter." "She did. A little girl of 4. Died 2 years ago from an allergic reaction the doctors couldn't reverse. Lucy blames herself to this day, says if she had been faster, more attentive, she could have saved the girl." The silence in the kitchen was heavy. The 3 boys had stopped crying and were listening to the adults' conversation. "Since then, she's worked in houses with children, always temporarily, always caring, always dedicated, but always keeping an emotional distance, until she came here." "Why was it different here?" Edward asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Because your children needed her the way her daughter needed her, and she couldn't resist. She gave herself completely to their care." Gabriel approached his father and tugged on his pants. "Dad, can you bring Aunt Lucy back?" Edward looked at his 3 sons. He saw the hope in Gabriel's eyes, Peter's silent anguish, Lucas's poorly disguised disappointment. For the first time since Anne Claire's death, he saw clearly what he had lost the night before. Not just an employee, but the first person who had managed to bring peace to his children in 8 months of mourning. "I'll try, Gabriel, I'll try." But even as he made that promise, Edward had no idea how to keep it, how to explain to a woman he had humiliated in front of 3 children she loved, how to ask for forgiveness for letting prejudices he didn't even know he carried speak louder than humanity, how to admit that, for a few seconds, he had seen her not as a dedicated woman caring for traumatized children, but as a threat his prejudiced mind had invented. The day passed slowly. Edward cancelled all his appointments and stayed home, trying to deal with his children's emotional crisis and his own growing guilt. In the afternoon, when he finally managed to get Gabriel to sleep, he went to Lucas's room. "Son, I need to talk to you." Lucas was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "You really like Aunt Lucy, don't you?" The boy turned to face him. "Dad, ever since Mom died, you've been really sad, and when you're sad, you stay away from us. Aunt Lucy doesn't. She stays close, she asks if we're okay. She cares when we're scared." Edward swallowed hard. "And I don't do that." Lucas hesitated before answering. "You try, Dad, but you're scared too. Aunt Lucy isn't afraid of our sadness." The wisdom of those words from a 10-year-old child shattered the last bit of resistance Edward still held. He had been a coward. He had chosen work over his children because it was easier to deal with problems that had solutions than with a grief that seemed endless. And when someone brave enough to face the pain of 3 orphaned children finally appeared, he had sent her away for reasons he didn't even fully understand himself. That night, Edward made a decision. He would go after Lucy Sanders. He would ask for forgiveness. He would beg her to come back, not as an employee, but as someone his children needed, and who perhaps he also needed to relearn how to be a father. But first he had to find her, and that, he suspected, would not be easy. Edward woke the next morning with a determination he hadn't felt in months. He had spent the entire night thinking about how to find Lucy, how to apologize, how to explain the inexplicable, how to tell a woman that he had judged her for what she was, not for what she did, how to admit that, for a few terrible seconds, his deepest prejudices had spoken louder than his humanity. Mrs. Davis was in the kitchen when he came down, preparing breakfast in silence. The boys were still asleep. She looked at him with an expression that mixed hope and skepticism. "Are you really going after her?" "I am, but I don't even know where she lives, Mrs. Davis. Do you have her address?" The housekeeper sighed and went to get an old address book from a kitchen drawer. 847 Palm Street, Greenwich Village. "But Edward, you need to understand something. This woman has pride. A lot of pride. She's not going to come back just because you asked." Edward jotted down the address on a piece of paper and put it in his shirt pocket. "Then I'll have to convince her that I've changed." "Have you really changed?" Mrs. Davis's question caught him off guard. He was silent for a few seconds, honestly considering the answer. "I'm trying to change, Mrs. Davis. I'm trying to understand why I reacted that way." Edward arrived at Palm Street around 9 in the morning. It was a narrow street, with old houses and small 2-story buildings. Number 847 was a simple house, with a peeling green gate and a small front garden. He rang the bell several times, but no one answered. A neighbor, a grey-haired lady watering plants in the house next door, approached the fence. "If you're looking for Lucy, she left early. Always does. Do you know where she went?" The lady looked him up and down, noticing his expensive clothes and his imported car parked on the street. "Are you her boss?" "I was. I am. It's complicated." The woman laughed without humor. "It's always complicated when the bosses come looking for the help. What happened? Did she break something, lose something valuable?" Edward felt his face burn with shame. "No, ma'am. I'm the one who broke something. I broke her trust." The neighbor studied him for a few more seconds before speaking. "Lucy's a good person, one of the best I know. If you did something to hurt her, you're going to have to work very hard to fix it. I know, that's why I'm here. She usually goes downtown in the morning. There's a shelter on Fulton Street where she helps out sometimes, but I don't know if that's where she is today." Edward thanked her and headed towards downtown Manhattan. The traffic was heavy, as always, but he wasn't paying attention. His mind was busy imagining what he would say when he found her, how to explain that he had mistaken dedication for invasion, how to apologize for seeing a threat where there was only love. The Hope Shelter was in an old building on Fulton Street, with a simple facade and a discreet sign at the entrance. Edward parked his car and entered hesitantly. The place smelled of home-cooked food and disinfectant. There were women of various ages sitting in plastic chairs, some with small children on their laps. A young woman in a white coat with her hair tied back, approached him. "Can I help you? I'm looking for a woman named Lucy Sanders. I was told she sometimes comes here." The young woman looked at him suspiciously. "Lucy is a volunteer of ours. Why are you looking for her?" I need to talk to her. It's personal." The woman hesitated, clearly assessing whether Edward posed any danger. "I'll ask if she wants to speak with you. What's your name?" "Edward Miller." The young woman disappeared through a door at the back of the shelter. Edward stood there in the middle of the room, feeling the weight of curious stares from the women in the shelter. Some whispered among themselves, probably wondering what a well-dressed man was doing there. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the door opened and Lucy appeared. She was wearing an apron over her clothes and carrying a pot in her hands. Her face was serious, without anger, but also without warmth. "Mr. Miller." "Lucy, Can I talk to you?" She placed the pot on a nearby table and took off the apron. "Let's talk outside." They went out to the sidewalk. The noise of the traffic and people created a soundscape that, paradoxically, made the conversation more intimate. "How did you find me?" "Your neighbor gave me a tip. Lucy, I need to apologize." She looked him in the eye without looking away. "For what, Mr. Miller? For firing me? For sending me away in front of the children? Or for thinking what you thought when you saw me in that bed?" The last question hit him like a punch to the gut. She had noticed. Of course, she had noticed. For all of it, but mostly for letting my prejudices speak louder than my ability to see what was really happening. Lucy nodded slowly. "You know, Mr. Miller, this isn't the first time this has happened to me. I've worked in other houses with children. It's always the same thing. At first, the parents are happy because I take good care of their kids. But when the children start to get too attached, when they start to see me as family, then comes the fear. Fear of what? Fear that I'm trying to take someone's place. Fear that a poor black woman is manipulating their children. Fear that I have ulterior motives." Edward lowered his head, ashamed. "I didn't think any of that consciously, Lucy. You don't have to think it consciously, Mr. Miller. Those thoughts are so ingrained in our society that they come out automatically. A woman like me, caring for rich, white children. Something must be wrong." The silence stretched between them. Edward struggled to find the right words. "You're right, and I'm wrong. Completely wrong. But my children, Lucy, my children are devastated without you." She crossed her arms, unconvinced. "Children get used to it. They always do. It's not just a matter of getting used to it. Gabriel cried all morning yesterday. Peter didn't say a word all day, and Lucas told me you were the only person who wasn't afraid of their sadness." Lucy closed her eyes for a moment, as if fighting her own emotions. "Mr. Miller, I lost my daughter 2 years ago. She was 4, the same age as Gabriel when your wife died. For a long time I couldn't even look at a child without remembering her. But when I started working at your house, when I saw those lost boys, not knowing how to deal with the pain..." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "They reminded me that I can still help, that I can still make a difference in someone's life, that maybe I couldn't save my daughter, but I can help other children." Edward felt his eyes well up. "How did she die?" "Allergic reaction to a medication. I was a nurse, worked at NYU Langone. I should have seen the signs earlier. I should have been faster. But by the time I realized, it was too late." "I didn't know you were a nurse." "I was. I lost my license after I couldn't work in a hospital anymore. I couldn't see sick children without thinking of her." Edward then understood why Lucy had been so efficient in caring for Gabriel when he choked, why she knew exactly how to clean Peter's wound. "Lucy, my children need you, and I think I do too." She looked at him with surprise. "You do?" "I need to learn how to be a father again. Since Anne-Claire died, I've taken refuge in my work because it's easier to deal with contracts than with children crying because they miss their mother. You manage to do what I can't. Stay close to their pain without running away." Lucy was silent for a few minutes, watching the movement on the street. "If I come back, things will have to be different." How so? First, I will no longer be treated as a domestic helper. If you want me to care for your children, I will be their caregiver, with the authority to make decisions about them when you're not here. Edward nodded immediately. Agreed. Second, you will go to therapy. The whole family. You, the children, me. All of us together. These children need to learn to deal with grief in a healthy way. He hesitated for a moment. He had never considered therapy. Is that necessary? Mr. Miller, you have 3 children traumatized by losing their mother and a father who runs from his own sadness by overworking. Of course it's necessary. All right. And third, fair wages. I don't want to be treated like a favor. I want a formal contract on the books with employment rights. If I'm going to be responsible for raising these children, I want to be recognized for it. Edward calculated mentally. The salary she was asking for was 3 times what he used to pay for domestic help. But she wasn't domestic help. She was a nurse, a caregiver, and apparently the only person capable of bringing peace to his children. I agree to everything. And one more thing, respect. If you ever suspect me of anything, if you ever think I'm doing something inappropriate with the children, you come talk to me first. You don't fire me in front of them. You don't humiliate me. You talk to me. Edward extended his hand to her. I promise. Lucy looked at his outstretched hand, hesitated for a moment, and then shook it. All right, I'll come back, but I'll need a few days to sort things out here at the shelter. Can I start on Monday? You can. And Lucy, thank you. Thank you for giving an idiot a second chance. She almost smiled. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Miller, even idiots. Edward returned home with a sense of relief he hadn't felt in a long time. He found the boys in the living room with Mrs. Davis, Gabriel still crying intermittently, Peter drawing dark figures in a notebook, Lucas reading a book but clearly unable to concentrate. Boys, I have some news. All 3 looked up simultaneously. Aunt Lucy is coming back. Gabriel was the first to react, jumping up and running to hug his father. Really, Daddy? Is she really coming back? Yes, she is. She's coming back on Monday. Peter dropped his colored pencils and for the first time in 2 days managed to smile. And she won't leave again? No, Peter. Not if everything goes well. Lucas was the most cautious. Dad, do you promise you won't send her away again? Edward knelt to his eldest son's level. Lucas, I promise I will do everything to make her feel welcome in this house. And I promise that if I have a problem with anything, I will talk to her before making any decisions. The weekend passed slowly, but with a positive anticipation the house hadn't felt in months. Edward cancelled the business trip he had scheduled for the following week. He wanted to be present for the first few days of Lucy's return. On Monday morning, he woke up early and went down to the kitchen. Mrs. Davis was already there, but there was something different about her manner. Edward, can I say something? Of course. I've worked in this house for 15 years. I saw you and Anne-Claire dating. I saw you get married. I saw the boys being born. And I have never seen anyone take care of these children the way Lucy did in these last 2 months. Edward nodded, listening. If you mess this up again, she won't be the one leaving. I will. Mrs. Davis's threat surprised him, but he understood where it came from. I won't mess it up, Mrs. Davis. I've learned my lesson. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Gabriel ran to open the door, followed by Peter and Lucas. Edward heard the joyful shouts in the hall and smiled. Lucy was back. She entered the house carrying a small suitcase and a discreet smile. The boys surrounded her like puppies starved for attention. Aunt Lucy, did you bring new stories? Gabriel asked. I did, sweetie. I brought lots of new stories. Edward approached. Lucy, welcome back. Thank you, Mr. Miller. She looked around the house as if remembering every corner. Shall we talk about the routine? Let's. They sat at the dining room table, the boys around them, Mrs. Davis discreet but present. So, what's the plan? Edward asked. Lucy took a small notebook from her bag. I made some notes over the weekend. First, fixed schedules. The children need routine. Breakfast at 7:30, lunch at noon, Dinner at 7. Everyone together, whenever possible. Edward nodded. Anne-Claire had always insisted on this, but after she died, the schedules had become a mess. Second, structured activities. 1 hour of homework a day, 1 hour of free play, 1 hour of family conversation, and on weekends, outings together. Outings? Lucas asked. The park, the movies, museums, things you used to do with your mum. Edward felt a pang in his chest. Since Anne-Claire's death, they hadn't gone out together once. And the therapy? He asked. I scheduled it for Thursday afternoon. It's a psychologist specializing in childhood grief, Dr. Marina. She'll see all of us. All of us? You too, Mr. Miller. A child learns by watching their father deal with his own feelings. Gabriel tugged on Lucy's blouse. Aunt Lucy, can you sleep here tonight? Edward choked on his coffee. Gabriel, Aunt Lucy has her own house. Lucy interrupted gently. Gabriel, I'll stay here every day until you fall asleep. But I'll go home at night. But if you have a nightmare or get scared, you can call me and I'll come, okay? How? Peter asked. She took a cell phone from her pocket and showed it to them. Your dad has my number. If you're scared and he doesn't know how to help, he'll call me and I'll come over. Edward realized she was creating a safety net for the children without committing to being available 24 hours a day. It was smart. And now, Lucas asked, now we start our new routine. Who wants to help me make lunch? All 3 hands shot up at the same time. Edward watched as Lucy organized the boys in the kitchen, each with a small but important task. Gabriel washed the tomatoes, Peter set the plates, Lucas cut carrots with a dull knife under close supervision. For the first time in 8 months, the house felt like a home again. That afternoon, while the children did their homework at the living room table under Lucy's guidance, Edward received an urgent work call. Before Anne-Claire died, he would have answered immediately. This time, he sent it to voicemail. Mr. Miller, Lucy called. He approached the table. Was it important? Edward looked at his children, focused on their notebooks, at Lucy patiently explaining a math problem to Peter, at the scene of normalcy he hadn't seen in so long. No, it wasn't important. And for the first time since Anne-Claire had died, Edward Miller understood that work could wait, but his children couldn't. 3 months had passed since Lucy returned to the Miller household, and the transformation was visible to anyone who knew the family before. The apartment in Greenwich Village had come back to life. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Lively conversations took place during meals, and for the first time since Anne-Claire's death, Edward was coming home before 7 o'clock most nights. The therapy sessions with Dr. Marina were having an effect. Gabriel had stopped having constant nightmares. Peter had started talking about his feelings again instead of just drawing dark figures. Lucas had begun to act like a child again, instead of carrying the weight of being responsible for his younger brothers, and Edward was slowly learning to balance work and fatherhood. Lucy had found her place in the family dynamic in a way that surprised everyone, especially herself. Not as a replacement for Anne-Claire, but as someone unique with her own way of caring and teaching. She had brought structure where there was chaos, patience where there was anxiety, and a constant presence the children hadn't had since they lost their mother. In the kitchen on that Thursday morning in January, the routine followed its natural course. Gabriel was helping Lucy make smoothies for everyone. Peter was organizing backpacks for school. Lucas was reading an adventure book while having breakfast. Edward, for the first time in almost a year, was sitting at the table with them, instead of rushing to a meeting. Aunt Lucy, there's a soccer game at school today. Can you come watch, Dad? Peter asked. Edward smiled. Since Lucy had established the house rules, she always referred to him as Mr. Miller in front of the children, a way to maintain hierarchical respect while exercising her authority as a caregiver. I can, Peter. What time is the game? At 3 in the afternoon. Then I'll cancel my meeting and be there. Gabriel clapped with joy. Will you cheer for my team too, Daddy? I'll cheer for both your teams, Gabriel. Lucy watched the scene with a discreet smile. It had taken time and a lot of effort from all sides, but finally that family was finding its new balance. Just then, the doorbell rang. Edward frowned. It was 8:30 in the morning, too early for visitors. "I'll get it," Lucy said, getting up from the table. She opened the door to find a man in a grey suit holding a briefcase and wearing a serious expression. "Edward Miller?" "No, I work here. He's having breakfast. May I ask who's looking for him?" "I'm a process server. I have a summons to deliver to Mr. Edward Miller." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. A summons was never good news. "One moment, please." She returned to the kitchen, where Edward was chatting excitedly with the boys about the afternoon soccer game. "Mr. Miller, there's a process server at the door. He brought a summons for you." The smile vanished from Edward's face. The boys fell silent, sensing the change in atmosphere. "A summons?" He got up and went to the door. The officer handed him a sealed envelope. "Edward Miller." "That's me." "Court summons. You have 15 days to retain an attorney and file a response." Edward signed the receipt with slightly trembling hands and closed the door. He returned to the kitchen where Lucy and the children were waiting anxiously. "Dad, what's a summons?" Lucas asked. It's when someone wants to resolve something in court, son." Edward opened the envelope and began to read the document. As he read, his expression grew increasingly grave. "What is it, Mr. Miller?" Lucy asked in a low voice. Edward looked at his sons, hesitated, and then decided they had the right to know. "Boys, your grandparents, the Campbells, Mom's parents, have filed a lawsuit. They want you to live with them." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Gabriel was the first to react. "They want us to leave here. They think it would be better for you, but that's just what they think. Nothing has changed yet." Lucas, always the most mature, asked the question Edward was dreading. "And Aunt Lucy? Can she come with us?" Edward continued reading the lawsuit. The more he read, the more his expression hardened. They're also questioning Lucy's presence here." "What do you mean?" Peter asked. Edward didn't want to go into detail in front of the children, but the lawsuit was clear. The maternal grandparents were alleging paternal negligence, exposing the episode of Lucy sleeping in the bed with the children, questioning her professional qualifications and even her mental health after the loss of her own daughter. "They think I'm not taking good care of you and that Lucy shouldn't be working with children." Lucy felt her stomach turn. It was the same situation she had experienced in other homes, only this time it was public, official. "Mr. Miller, maybe it's best if I step away until this is resolved." "No!" the three boys shouted at the same time. Edward looked at her with determination. "You're not going anywhere, Lucy. We're going to face this together." In the following weeks, the Miller family's life was turned upside down. Edward hired Dr. Francis Allen, one of New York's best family lawyers. The maternal grandparents, Joseph and Carmen Campbell, had resources and hired an equally competent legal team. The case, which should have been handled privately because it involved minors, ended up leaking to the media. A local newspaper journalist gained access to the documents and published an article with the headline, "Absentee Father Leaves Orphaned Children in Care of a Unqualified Maid." The report described Edward as a workaholic businessman who had neglected his children after his wife's death. Lucy was portrayed as a disturbed woman who had lost her own daughter and was now inappropriately clinging to her employer's children. The bedroom incident was described sensationally, implying inappropriate behavior. Edward discovered the article when he arrived at his office on a Monday morning and found his secretary with an embarrassed expression. "Mr. Miller, maybe you should see this," she said, handing him the newspaper. Edward read the article and felt a rage he hadn't experienced since the night he fired Lucy. But this time the anger was directed at the journalists and Anne Claire's parents, not at the woman who cared for his children with such affection. At home, Lucy was dealing with the consequences differently. She had received calls from former employers questioning her conduct. A mother whose children she had cared for 2 years earlier called to say she would no longer recommend her to anyone. When Mr. Miller arrived home that afternoon, he found her in the kitchen with red eyes. "Lucy, are you okay?" She showed him some printed emails she had received. "People are saying I'm a danger to children, that I use families' pain to take advantage of them." Edward read the emails and felt his anger grow even more. "This is ridiculous. Anyone who knows you knows it's not true. But people don't know me, Mr. Miller. They only know what they read in the newspaper. The boys came home from school that day quieter than usual. Lucas went straight to talk to his father. "Dad, the kids at school are talking about us." "What are they saying?" "That Aunt Lucy is mean, that she wants to steal us from you, that you're a bad dad." Edward knelt to his son's level. "And you believe that?" "Of course not, but it's hard to hear those things." "I know, son, but sometimes people say bad things about situations they don't understand." On the day of the hearing, 3 weeks after the summons, the courthouse was packed. Journalists, onlookers, and activists from both sides crowded outside. Edward, Lucy, and the children entered through a back door, escorted by their lawyer. Judge Marcia Roberts was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and a reputation for being strict but fair. She had reviewed all the case documents and seemed prepared for a long and complex hearing. The grandparents' lawyer, Dr. Robert Mason, spoke first. "Your Honor, the maternal grandparents, Joseph and Carmen Campbell, are petitioning for custody of Lucas, Peter, and Gabriel Miller on the grounds that the father, Edward Miller, does not provide a suitable environment for the children's healthy development." He presented a detailed dossier. Edward's excessive work hours, the multiple changes of caregivers in the months after Anne-Claire's death, the controversial bedroom incident, and a psychological report questioning Lucy's emotional stability. Furthermore, Your Honor, we question the suitability of the current caregiver, Lucy Sanders, a woman who lost her own child under traumatic circumstances and who has no formal qualifications to care for orphaned children. Dr. Francis Allen rose for the defense. "Your Honor, what we have here is a father who went through a natural period of grief after losing his wife, but who has completely restructured his life to prioritize his children's well-being. The children are in therapy, have an established routine, and most importantly, are happy and well-adjusted." She presented reports from Dr. Marina, the psychologist, attesting to the significant improvement in the emotional state of the 3 children. She also brought testimonies from their teachers, reporting the boys' academic and social progress. As for Ms. Lucy Sanders, she is not just a caregiver. She is a nurse with 20 years of experience who found in the Miller family an opportunity to exercise her calling to care for children in a state of emotional vulnerability. The judge heard testimonies from both sides. Joseph Campbell, the maternal grandfather, a 68-year-old retired engineer, spoke of his financial ability to support his grandsons and the emotional stability he and his wife could offer. When it was Edward's turn to speak, he was visibly nervous. "Your Honor, I admit I made mistakes after my wife's death. I took refuge in my work because I didn't know how to deal with my own pain and my children's pain. But I learned. I changed. Today I know that being a father is the most important thing I do in my life." He looked at Lucy, sitting in the chairs reserved for witnesses. "And if there's anyone who taught me that, it was Lucy. She showed me that traumatized children need presence, not presents. They need time, not money. They need someone who isn't someone, afraid to be close to their pain." When it was Lucy's turn to testify, she stood with dignity. She wore a simple navy blue dress, and her hair was tied in a low bun. "Your Honor, I lost my daughter 2 years ago. For a long time I thought I would never be able to care for children again without falling apart inside. But when I met Lucas, Peter, and Gabriel, I realized they were lost in the same way I was, and that maybe, by caring for them, I could honor my daughter's memory." She spoke about the nights Gabriel woke up screaming, about how Peter drew only black figures for weeks, about the excessive responsibility Lucas had taken on. "I didn't try to replace their mother. No one can do that. But I tried to be someone they could trust, someone who would be present even in the most difficult moments." Lucy's defense was emotional but controlled. She admitted her mistakes, explained her professional qualifications, and most importantly, demonstrated a deep understanding of the specific needs of each of the 3 children. Dr. Robert Mason tried to break her credibility. "Ms. Sanders, don't you find it problematic that a woman who lost her own daughter due to medical negligence is caring for orphaned children?" Lucy took a deep breath before answering. "Sir, I did not lose my daughter to medical negligence. I lost her to a rare and unforeseen allergic reaction, and it is precisely because I lived through that loss that I can understand the pain of these children in a way that perhaps other people cannot. The most important part of the hearing took place in a private room, where Judge Roberts spoke individually with each of the 3 children, without the adults present. Lucas went first. He sat in a small armchair in front of the judge's desk, his hands nervously clasped. "Lucas, do you understand why we're here today?" the judge asked in a gentle voice. "I do. Grandpa and Grandma Campbell want us to live with them." "And what do you think about that?" The 10-year-old boy hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I like my grandparents. They're nice and have a big house, but they don't really know us. They don't know that Peter has nightmares if he eats sugar after 7 at night. They don't know that Gabriel can only fall asleep if someone is singing softly. They don't know that I get worried when my dad is late coming home. And does Lucy know?" "Aunt Lucy knows everything. She remembers Gabriel's allergy medicine. She talks to me when I'm worried about my dad. She's teaching Peter to draw colorful things instead of just black things." Peter entered next, shyer, but equally clear in his statements. "Peter, tell me how you feel living with your dad and Lucy." "I feel safe. Before Aunt Lucy came, I was scared to sleep because I dreamed that everyone would leave like Mommy did. But Aunt Lucy explained that Mommy didn't choose to leave. She got sick." "And do you still have nightmares?" "Sometimes. But when I do, I can call Aunt Lucy or my dad, and they come talk to me." Gabriel, the youngest, gave the most direct answer. "Gabriel, if you could choose where to live, where would you choose?" "I want to live with Daddy, with Lucas, with Peter, and with Aunt Lucy, all together." "Why?" "Because Aunt Lucy makes good smoothies, tells funny stories, and doesn't get sad when I cry. And because Daddy plays with me after work now." "And if you had to choose between living with your grandparents or living without Aunt Lucy?" Gabriel thought for a few seconds. "Can I say something?" "Of course." "Aunt Lucy told me she had a little girl who went to heaven like Mommy, and she told me that taking care of us makes her heart hurt less. So if I go away, will her heart hurt again?" The judge felt a lump in her throat. "What do you think?" "I think so, and I don't want her heart to hurt." When the hearing resumed, Judge Roberts had made her decision. After hearing all parties and, most importantly, after speaking with the 3 children involved, this court decides to maintain custody with the father, Edward Miller, under certain conditions. Edward felt both relief and tension. The conditions are as follows: mandatory continuation of family psychological counseling, bi-weekly visits from a social worker for 6 months, and the regularization of the professional status of the caregiver, Lucy Sanders. The judge looked directly at Lucy. "Miss Sanders, you are required to obtain certification as a caregiver specializing in childhood trauma within 6 months. The state will provide support for you to regularize your professional situation." Lucy nodded, emotional. "The decision is based on the principle of the best interests of the children, who have clearly demonstrated where they feel safe and loved. I understand the maternal grandparents' concern, but emotional stability is not measured by financial conditions alone." Joseph Campbell stood up, visibly displeased. "Your Honor, we will appeal this decision." "That is your right, but until the appeal is heard, custody remains with the father." Edward held Lucy's hand as they left the courthouse. Outside, a crowd of journalists awaited them. Microphones were pushed towards their faces. Flashes went off. Questions were shouted simultaneously. "Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say about the decision? What was your feeling upon hearing the verdict? Ms. Lucy, do you consider this a victory?" Edward stopped on the courthouse steps. For a moment, he thought about saying nothing, about just getting out of there as quickly as possible. But then he looked at Lucy by his side, remembered his children waiting at home, and made a decision. "I would like to make a statement." The buzz subsided. Edward took a deep breath. 4 months ago, I made one of the worst mistakes of my life. I came back from a business trip and found this woman, Lucy Sanders, caring for my children in the most loving way possible. And do you know what I did? I sent her away, because I saw a black woman in bed with my children, and my prejudice spoke louder than my humanity. A complete silence fell over the journalists. But this woman not only forgave my ignorance, she came back to our home and taught me how to be a father again. She saved my children from depression, she saved me from my own cowardice, and today our family only exists because she decided to give us a second chance. Edward looked directly at the cameras. So yes, I consider myself victorious today, not because I won a lawsuit, but because I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love and care every single day. And Lucy Sanders is not our employee. She is our family. Edward's statement went viral on social media. Some attacked him for exposing his own ignorance. Others praised him for his honesty. But what mattered to him wasn't public opinion. It was the expression on his children's faces when they got home that afternoon. Gabriel ran to hug Lucy. "Aunt Lucy, the lady on TV said you're going to stay with us forever. Is that true?" Lucy looked at Edward, who nodded. "It's true, sweetie. I'm going to stay." Edward's public declaration on the courthouse steps changed everything. In the following days, the Miller family received hundreds of messages of support, letters, emails, and social media comments from people who saw themselves in the story of redemption and second chances. Single mothers fighting prejudice, fathers trying to balance work and family, black professionals facing constant suspicion. Lucy, who for weeks had been portrayed as a threat, suddenly became a symbol of resilience and dedication. She received invitations to give talks, job offers, and most importantly, emotional support from people who understood her journey. Edward returned to work the Monday after the trial and found a surprise on his desk. His partners had prepared a proposal to restructure his work hours, allowing him to maintain his revenue, but with more flexibility to be present in his children's lives. The most significant change, however, came through a phone call Lucy received on a Tuesday afternoon. She was helping Peter with his math homework when her cell phone rang. "Hello? Lucy, it's me, Patricia, your sister." Lucy almost dropped the phone. She hadn't spoken to Patricia in 2 years, not since little Julia's funeral. The pain of the loss had created a barrier between them that seemed insurmountable. "Patricia, how did you get my number?" "I saw you on television. That father's statement." "Wow, Lucy, I was so proud." Lucy left the room to talk privately. "Proud?" "Proud to see that you found a way to turn your pain into care, that you're helping other children." The two talked for over an hour. Patricia, a social worker in Philadelphia, said she had followed the case's coverage and realized how unfair she had been to blame Lucy for Julia's death. "I was so angry, Lou, so angry at God, at the doctors, at the world, and I ended up taking it out on you because it was easier to have someone to blame." Lucy cried on the phone for the first time since Julia had died. "I blame myself a lot too, Pat. I still do sometimes. But you turned it into something good. Those children are lucky to have you. They saved me as much as I saved them." Patricia made a proposal that would completely change the course of Lucy's life. "Lou, there's a specialization course in traumatic childcare at Columbia University. It's for healthcare professionals who work with children in vulnerable situations. I can help you apply." Lucy hesitated. It had been so long since she had thought about going back to school, about resuming her career in healthcare. "I don't even know if I can still do it, Pat. It's been 2 years since I set foot in a hospital." "It doesn't have to be in a hospital. This course also qualifies you to work in shelters, schools, families. It's exactly what you're doing now, but with official certification." That evening, during dinner, Lucy told the family about the conversation with her sister. "That's wonderful," Edward said. "You should apply." "But what about you all? If I start studying, I'll have less time available." Gabriel, who was playing with the beans on his plate, looked up. "Aunt Lucy, are you going to be a doctor again?" "Not a doctor, sweetie, but I'm going to study to learn more about how to take care of children." "And will you still take care of us?" "I will. No matter what I study, I will always be here for you." Lucas, ever practical, asked the important question. "Dad, can you help Aunt Lucy with her studies?" Edward smiled. "Of course. We can rearrange our schedules so she has time to study. And I can pay for the course if she wants. Lucy looked at him surprised. Mr. Miller, that's very expensive. Lucy, you've completely changed our lives. It's the least I can do. Enrolling in the course was the first step in a transformation that would take months to complete. Lucy returned to academic settings, reconnected with old colleagues, and slowly began to rebuild her identity as a healthcare professional. The course was intensive, 3 mornings a week of theoretical classes and 2 afternoons of practical internship. Edward completely reorganized his schedule to be present when Lucy couldn't be. The first few weeks were challenging. Lucy had lost her academic confidence and felt out of place among younger, more up-to-date colleagues. But gradually, her practical experience with the Miller children proved to be more valuable than any theory. Dr. Charles Martin, the course coordinator, soon noticed Lucy's potential. Miss Sanders, I'd like to speak with... Are you after class? Lucy got nervous, thinking she had done something wrong. Of course, Professor. Ms. Sanders, your case study in the last class was exceptional. The way you handled abandonment trauma in 3 children simultaneously demonstrates a rare skill. Thank you, Professor. I was wondering if you would be willing to present your case at the National Pediatric Conference in September. Lucy almost choked. Present? Me? Your work is a perfect example of how comprehensive care can reverse complex traumas. It would be very valuable for other professionals. Lucy accepted the invitation and spent the next few months preparing her presentation. Edward and the children helped her, sharing their own perspectives on the family's healing process. Meanwhile, the family developed new rituals and traditions. Fridays became pizza and movie night. Saturdays were for outings. Sundays were for visiting the Campbell grandparents, who gradually came to accept Lucy as an integral part of their grandchildren's lives. Joseph Campbell was the first to give in. Lucy, can I speak with you for a moment? He asked one Sunday afternoon. Of course, Mr. Campbell. They sat in the garden of the grandparents' house while the children played in the pool. I want to apologize to you for the lawsuit, for the things we said about you. Lucy looked at him with surprise. You were worried about your grandchildren. It's understandable. No, it's not. I let fear and prejudice speak louder than common sense. These children haven't been this happy since before Anne Claire died. Joseph hesitated before continuing. Carmen and I always wanted to help, but we didn't know how. We thought love and money solved everything. You taught them that there are other important things. They are special children. They just needed someone who wasn't afraid to be close to their pain. The family reconciliation brought even greater stability to the boys. For the first time since their mother's death, they had a solid support network, a present father, a dedicated caregiver, involved grandparents, a structured routine, and professional support. In September, Lucy presented her work at the pediatric conference. Edward and the children went to watch her. Seeing the woman who cared for them being applauded by doctors and psychologists from all over the country was an indescribably proud moment. Dr. Helen Taylor, head of the pediatric department at NYU Langone Health, approached Lucy after the presentation. Miss Sanders, I'd like to discuss a job opportunity with you. Lucy looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. We're implementing a pilot program for integrated care for traumatized children. We need someone with your profile to coordinate the team. But I haven't finished my specialization yet. That can be adjusted. What matters is your practical experience and your ability to get results. The offer was tempting. Coordinate an innovative program, work with complex cases, train other professionals. But Lucy had a family to care for. Can I think about it? Of course, but I'd like you to know that the program would operate on a part-time basis, 3 mornings a week initially. That night, the whole family gathered in the living room to discuss the proposal. Aunt Lucy, do you want to work at the hospital? Gabriel asked. I do, sweetie, but only if you all agree. And will you stop taking care of us? Never. You are my priority. You always will be. Peter, who had become more communicative in recent months, made an observation that surprised everyone. Aunt Lucy, if you help other kids like you helped us, that will be really good. Edward smiled. Peter's right, you have a gift. Lucy, It would be selfish to keep it all to ourselves. Lucas, ever practical, wanted to know the details. But will you be here when we get home from school? I will. The job would be in the morning while you're at school. Then it's okay. Lucy accepted the position at the hospital. In the following months, she developed care protocols that became a national reference. Her methodology, based on constant presence and emotional validation, was incorporated into the training of nurses and social workers in several hospitals across the country. The program grew so much that the hospital decided to formalize it as the Lucy Sanders Program for Traumatic Childcare. At the official launch ceremony, Lucy took the stage accompanied by Edward and the 3 children. In her speech, she talked about the journey she had taken from losing Julia to that moment. For a long time, I thought my daughter had died in vain, that her passing had no meaning. But today I understand that Julia taught me that loving is the only real way to honor those who are gone, and that caring for other children doesn't diminish the love I feel for her, but multiplies it. 6 months later, on a Thursday afternoon, Edward called Lucy to talk privately. "Lucy, I have a proposal to make." She sat in the living room armchair, curious. Edward took an envelope from his pocket. "I spoke with my lawyer about a legal matter. If anything happens to me, I want to be sure that you will have legal authority over the children." Lucy was speechless. "This is a co-guardianship document. If you sign it, you will have the same rights over Lucas, Peter, and Gabriel as I do, not as an employee but as family." She opened the envelope with trembling hands and read the document. It was an official recognition of what already existed in practice. She was as responsible for those children as their own father. "Edward, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You just need to know that you're not a stranger who takes care of my children. You are part of this family, with all the rights and responsibilities that implies." Lucy signed the document. When the children heard the news, Gabriel asked the question that was in everyone's heart. "Aunt Lucy, can I call you Mom now?" Lucy knelt to his level and held his small hands. "Sweetie, I will never try to take your mommy's place. She is unique and special, and will always be your mother. And you?" I am your Lucy, someone who chose to love you and take care of you every day. If you want to call me Mom Lucy, that's okay. If you want to keep calling me Aunt Lucy, that's okay too. The important thing is that you know I'm here forever." At the end of that year, Lucy decided to take the children to visit her hometown, Ithaca, and to visit Julia's grave. Edward not only allowed the trip, but insisted on accompanying them. The trip was carefully planned. Lucy had spoken with Dr. Marina about how to introduce Julia to the boys, how to explain the death of a child to other children who had experienced the loss of their mother. At the cemetery on a sunny December morning, Lucy knelt before the small pink headstone that marked where her daughter rested. "Julia, my princess, I brought some people to meet you." Gabriel approached first with the natural curiosity of a child. "Hi, Julia, I'm Gabriel. Your mommy takes care of us now." Peter placed a small flower he had picked from the cemetery garden. "Hi, Julia, your mommy is really nice. She makes good smoothies and tells funny stories." Lucas, more mature, understood the profound meaning of that moment. "Julia, thank you so much for lending us your mum. We'll take good care of her, I promise." Lucy cried, but not from sadness. For the first time since Julia had died, her tears were of gratitude. Gratitude for having loved so much, for having been loved, and for having found a way to continue loving. Edward watched the scene from a distance, respecting the intimacy of the moment, but present as emotional support. On the way back to New York, the car was filled with lively conversations about the trip, about Julia, about plans for the summer vacation. The children had naturally incorporated the memory of Lucy's daughter into their own family stories. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Edward and Lucy sat in the backyard of the house, watching the starry New York sky. "Lucy, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever imagine your life would be like this when you lost Julia?" Lucy laughed softly. "Never. I thought I would never be happy again, that I would never be able to care for children without falling apart. And now? Now I understand that Julia didn't die to teach me something. She simply died, period. But I chose to use the pain of that loss to create something beautiful. I chose to turn the emptiness into care." Edward nodded. "You know, Lucy, on the day I fired you, I thought I was protecting my children from something. I didn't know I was almost depriving them of the person who was going to save them. Don't make me out to be a hero, Edward. They saved me as much as I saved them, maybe even more." "How so?" "They taught me that it's possible to love again after losing everything. That family isn't just about blood, but about daily choices, about waking up every day and deciding to stay even when it gets hard." Edward looked at the house where his children were sleeping peacefully for the first time in over a year. "I think this is what Anne Claire wanted for them, for us. I'm sure it is." The two were silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Lucy, can I make a confession?" "You can. That first night, when I found you sleeping with them, I wasn't just angry because you were in my bed. I was angry because you were managing to do what I couldn't. What? Stay close to their pain, not be afraid to see them sad, not run away when they cried." Edward took a deep breath before continuing. "I was afraid that if I got too close to their sadness, I would fall apart too. It was easier to work late than to sit at the table and see the empty places. And now I know that running away from sadness doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it grow. And that being close to my children's pain doesn't break me. It strengthens me." Lucy smiled. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "For years I blamed myself for not saving Julia. I thought that if I had been a better nurse, a more attentive mother, she would be alive. And now? Now I understand that some things are beyond our control, but others are not. I couldn't save my daughter, but I could help your children. I couldn't prevent my loss, but I could turn it into a gain for other people." Edward stood up and extended a hand to help her. "I think we should go inside. Tomorrow is a school day, and you know how grumpy Gabriel gets when he doesn't sleep well." Lucy laughed and took his outstretched hand. "He gets that from his mother. Anne Claire was always very sensitive to changes in routine." They went into the house together, turned off the lights, and went up to check on the children. Gabriel was clinging to the teddy bear Lucy had given him. Peter was asleep with a book he'd been reading. Lucas had left a drawing on his nightstand. A house with 5 people in front, all holding hands. 2 years after that conversation in the backyard, the Miller-Sanders family was celebrating Gabriel's 5th birthday with a party in the park. Friends from school were there, the Campbell grandparents, Patricia and her husband, some of Lucy's colleagues from the hospital, and even Mrs. Davis, who had become practically a grandmother to the boys. Edward looked at the scene. Lucy organizing the children for a photo, Gabriel chasing his friends, Peter showing his new colorful drawing to his grandparents, Lucas helping to serve the cake. Dr. Charles Martin, who had become a family friend, approached him. "Edward, I can say I've rarely seen such a complete family transformation. Thank you, Doctor, but the credit isn't mine. It belongs to both of you, and especially to the children who knew how to forgive and start over." Edward nodded, watching Lucy teach a new game to a group of children. "You know, Doctor, today I understand that when Lucy came into our lives, it wasn't just an employee who showed up. It was a second chance for all of us." "A second chance?" "A chance to be a real family. Not perfect, but real. Not without problems, but with enough love to solve any problem." That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, exhausted from the party, Edward and Lucy sat in the living room tidying up the presents and talking about the day. "It was a beautiful party," Lucy said. "Anne Claire would have loved to see Gabriel so happy." "I'm sure she saw it, Edward. From somewhere she saw it." Edward stopped folding the paper towels and looked at Lucy. "Sometimes I talk to her, you know. I tell her how the boys are, how you are. I thank her for sending you to us." "Do you really think it was her?" Lucy smiled. "I don't know if I believe in those things, but I know that some connections are too special to be just a coincidence." They finished tidying the room in a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about family, loss, new beginnings, and love. Before going up to bed, Lucy checked each room as she did every night. Gabriel was sleeping peacefully without nightmares. Peter had left a book open on his bed, a sign that he had fallen asleep reading. Lucas was sleeping, hugging the soccer trophy he had won at school. At the door of her own room, she found Edward organizing some papers. "Good night, Edward." "Good night, Lucy, and thank you." "For what?" "For making our house a home again." She smiled and whispered before closing the door. "Thank you. For giving me a family again." In the silence of the New York night, the house in Greenwich Village slept in peace. 5. People whom fate had brought together in an unforeseen way, who had together crossed the pain of loss, prejudice, suspicion, and fear, and who had chosen every day to build a family based not on blood, but on the conscious decision to love. Because in the end, Edward, Lucy, Lucas, Peter, and Gabriel learned that true healing doesn't come from perfection, but from the willingness to love what is broken until it blooms again. They learned that family is about staying, even when everything tells you to leave. And they discovered that sometimes the most special people enter our lives at the exact moment we need them most, not as strangers, but as gifts we didn't even know we were waiting for. And that true love doesn't replace anything or anyone, but multiplies, heals, and transforms everything around it. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Edward, Lucy, and the children has deeply touched your hearts. This story about overcoming prejudice, family built by love, and second chances reminds us that we all deserve forgiveness and a new beginning. If you were moved by this narrative, show your appreciation by leaving a like, subscribing to our channel, and sharing in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. We bring stories like this every day, narratives that speak of the human capacity to transform pain into love and to build bonds that transcend all barriers. Until the next episode, where we will once again explore the deepest mysteries of the human soul.